Hello there, my name's Linda Sterry and I work for a charity called Funeral Link based in Dundee, and we're here today to kind of share a little bit about power of attorney and some of the challenges that brings, burst some of the myths that you might have heard about, and we are here as part of Say Something Dundee. Michelle and I are part of the steering group. Say Something Dundee is a community initiative that really aims to encourage more and easier conversations around anything related to death, dying, bereavement and care. And this recording today is part of our Planning Ahead sessions. We're part of a Scotland-wide Tuacanta group, which is led by Caroline and the rest of the team at Good Life, Good Death, Good Grief. And we've recorded a few of these sessions up to now, and we're going to do a few more. But the aim is really just to kind of complement. We've been doing some Zoom information sessions over the last year or so. And the aim of this is really just to kind of touch on some of the real essence of what is power of attorney, why do I need it, what happens if I don't have one, and how much it costs, and some of the other things we'll cover in this session. So, Lorna, would you like to introduce yourself? You know, we're really delighted that you're able to join us today. It's been good to work with you on this stuff, and if you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Lorna Christine. I'm a partner at Thorntons Law in Dundee. I've specialised in powers of attorney and wills now for over 20 years, and I've really enjoyed being part of these workshops, just speaking to people and just really giving them information in a sort of fairly informal and accessible way.
And Michelle, would you like to just introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, so my name's Michelle Donoghue. I've been part of the Say Something steering group for about 18 months, been involved in the conversation cafes, the information sessions. I'm a counsellor with an interest in bereavement as well.
Great stuff. Thank you. So Lorna, if I've never heard of what power of attorney is, can you just tell us a little bit, what is it, and why would I need it, or want to even have a conversation about it?
Yeah, so a power of attorney is really a document that I prepare, and in that document you're giving powers to your attorneys to act on your behalf if you're no longer able to. So we've got an ageing population now, and we're really seeing people living longer and longer, and really I can't recommend power of attorney enough. It's just as important as having a will. So what you're saying in the document is that you're appointing people that you trust to make decisions for you in the future if you need that help. So a lot of people say to me, oh, well, I'm too young for that. I don't need to think about it just now. That's something for someone older or maybe not well. I think the key thing is that you have to be healthy to put the power of attorney in place. So you have to have capacity when it's granted. So we're encouraging people to think about power of attorney really, you know, at any age, because we want you to be able to have the ability to deal with things, you know, if the worst should happen. So certainly one of the first things you should probably think about is who your attorneys are going to be. And we would normally recommend that you have at least 2 attorneys, and they should be people that you trust. So usually it's family, but it doesn't have to be. You can have a main attorney and then maybe a backup. So for example, you could have your spouse or partner and maybe a child as a backup. And what that would mean is your spouse or partner would act initially, and then if they were no longer able to at any point, your child would come on at that point. So it really is an important document. It's quite a lengthy document, I'm not going to lie. And the reason for that is that in Scotland, attorneys can only act based on the powers in the deed. So we have to really cover anything that might come up. So it's a bit of a lengthy read when you get it. But I think the key thing to remember is we need it to be flexible. We need it to work for, you know, quite a number of years. So, you know, the key thing is that you're appointing people that you trust. And just because a power is in the deed doesn't mean that it will definitely be used. It just means that it can be used if the need is there.
So Lorna, I've mentioned before that, you know, as a single person, you know, I just again assume that power of attorney, if I ended up with no capacity, that would be my next of kin, you know, and that's not necessarily true, is that right?
No, so next of kin is a bit of a confusing term. A lot of people talk about next of kin because I think, you know, on your medical records, maybe you have a next of kin that someone would phone if something happened to you, but that's quite different from an attorney or even an executor in a will. So you really have to appoint an attorney so that they have authority to act on your behalf. So, for example, if you had a partner or a child, they wouldn't automatically be able to access your bank accounts if something happened to you just because they're related to you or they're close to you. You would need to have that official authority, and that comes in the form of a power of attorney document. You do really need to have that. And even married couples, this is a common myth that I hear, oh, my husband would just be able to deal with it because he's my husband, or my wife would be able to deal with it because she's my wife. That's not necessarily true. Joint accounts, yeah, that's absolutely fine. But sole accounts, you know what places are like nowadays. They're wanting more, information from you before they release anything. You really need a power of attorney to allow you to deal with those sorts of things. And the document itself is quite wide, so it would cover financial powers and welfare powers. Right. So the financial powers would be things like dealing with bank accounts, dealing with houses, pensions, investments, all these sorts of things. The welfare part would deal with your health. So any issues like, could be simple things like getting dental treatment or a prescription for your glasses, or it could be more complex things like consenting to an operation or deciding what care is necessary for you. And the powers are contained within one document, but they operate in slightly different ways. So with the welfare powers, your attorney can only act for you if you've lost capacity. Now that's a decision that a medical practitioner would make. There would need to be some sort of letter issued or report issued to say that you've lost capacity. And at that point, your welfare attorney can make decisions for you. But you, up until that point, should always be making decisions about your health yourself. It might be you can always make decisions about your health until you pass away. With the financial side, it's a wee bit more flexible. So your attorney, you can say to your attorney, you know what, I'm really struggling, I can't get out anymore. Can you go to the bank and deal with my bank account for me? And your attorney can start to take over at that point. But if you then later lost capacity, they can continue to deal with your financial affairs at that point. And if you ever see a power of attorney, the financial powers are actually called continuing powers for that reason, because they continue if you lose capacity.
So when we're thinking about power of attorney, what happens if I don't have one of these? What happens if something happens to me and I haven't got a power of attorney in place? Can you chat a little bit about that?
So if for example, you didn't have a power of attorney, you'd lost capacity, you can't really go down that road anymore, and that's encouraging people to make while they're well. There are other options. So if you no longer had capacity, you might be able to go for something called a guardianship order. Now that's a court process, so that means that it's a wee bit more lengthy, there's a lot more involved, it's more intrusive, to be honest. That's not something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, but we do have a team that deal with guardianship orders. I think the message today is that the power of attorney is much simpler, it's much quicker. It also gives you control because you can choose your attorneys in the deed, whereas with guardianship, anyone with an interest can apply to be your guardian. So it might be you don't want to apply, So I think the power of attorney it gives you that control. So yes, there's always a way of dealing with things, but the preference is really to have the power of attorney. And in terms of cost, a power of attorney might cost you, for example, maybe something like £300 plus VAT. And there's a registration due that we pay to get it registered with the public guardian that's £81. And I know that's not nothing, that's quite an investment. But what I would say is dealing with guardianship is a lot more prolonged, just a much more intrusive process. For this, fairly small amount of money, you can get a power of attorney put in place, put it away and forget about it. And then if something happens, you've got it there. And you're also making things easier for your family. If you take unwell, they don't have that panic of, what do we do? Mum's not well, we don't have a power of attorney. They can just go and get it and say, well, actually, we've got this, and we can now just start to use it. So we are seeing more and more people take these out, earlier. We also have some situations that we deal with where maybe someone has never had capacity. So for example, I see a lot of parents come to see me, maybe their children have learning difficulties and they're approaching 16. Now, the mum and dad would be dealing with the child, up until that point quite easily, there'll be no issues. But as the child approaches 16, they need to think about, right, what are we going to do now? And, how can we deal with that? So a guardianship order might also be appropriate in that circumstance. So it's not just elderly clients.
No. And I think one of the things that came up in one of our last sessions that we held was sometimes healthcare professionals are seeking this documentation, you know, at the time when someone may be kind of borderline with or without capacity. And I think we had a real flavour in the sessions that we ran that can be really quite challenging for some of the healthcare professionals who are involved in those sort of situations.
Yeah, I think quite often if someone is taken into hospital, that might be a trigger point, because the professionals realise that their capacity is not great, or they're not sure whether they have capacity. For example, there might be a question around, is that person able to return home, or are they going to maybe need more care? And then if they don't have capacity, who is going to make that decision? And if there's no power of attorney, what do you do in that scenario? So I think all of this just emphasises that if you can get the power of attorney in place before these issues arise, it just makes it so much easier. And it's a fairly straightforward process. You know, it involves a chat with the solicitor, you know, about what power of attorney is, who you want to appoint as your attorneys. We can just explain and go through the process as much as you want. We would then draft the document for you. Now, when it comes to being signed, it has to be signed in the presence of a solicitor or a doctor. And that's because there's a certificate at the back where we're saying that the person has capacity to grant the document. Now, that can take place face to face, or we can sign these documents over a Zoom call like this. So Linda, you could sign the power of attorney, I could watch you sign, and then when it comes back to the office, I could complete my part of the document. So it's fairly straightforward. What I would say is that the power of attorney has to be registered to be valid. It's registered with the Public Guardian's Office. That's a national body that deals with powers of attorney in Scotland. At the moment, it is taking quite a while to register powers of attorney. It's taking some months. So, you know, once you've signed your power of attorney, that's your part done. It will go off to be registered, and it will take a bit of time to come back. If there is an urgency, you know, if something happens in that couple of months while you're waiting for it to be registered, you should contact your solicitor, because we can accelerate applications if there's a need. So, for example, if someone went into hospital or a situation arose, it is certainly worth a phone call to the solicitor to ask if they can accelerate it. And usually we find that's accepted, and they will return the power of attorney fairly quickly, so you can try and move on with things.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. Gosh, there's a lot to think about, isn't it? And I guess the attorneys can be different for finance and for welfare. They don't have to be the same.
Yeah, you can choose. So as I said, it's all one document, and there'll be a financial section and a welfare section. And you do want to think carefully about who your attorneys are, but you can appoint different people as your financial and your welfare attorneys. I have lots of people that maybe have, say, 3 or 4 children, and they don't want to leave anyone out. You want to treat everyone the same. So, for example, 4 attorneys might be quite a lot, you know, just for one part, but maybe you could have 2 acting in one capacity and 2 in another capacity. Also, just to mention, I get asked sometimes, what if the attorneys don't agree? You know, or what if they don't get on? I think the first thing to say about that is, you know, if you've got 2 sons and they don't get on, maybe don't appoint them in the first place. Have a think about, could one do one role and one do another? So there's not that argument. But if attorneys couldn't reach agreement, ultimately the matter could end up before a sheriff. But that's really what you want. I think you want to try and choose attorneys that can work well together, and not to maybe put yourself in a position where that are. Most families, people get on fairly well. And the attorneys have to act in the best interests of the adults. So they shouldn't really be letting their personal feelings come into it. They should really be wearing their attorney hat and acting in that role. And the main principle behind the adults with incapacity legislation is least intervention. So the attorneys aren't meant to go in there and just take over.
Yeah.
A lot of clients worried about that, about, you know, the attorneys will just come in and take control. It's not like that. They're really there just to assist and enable you, and they shouldn't be coming in there to just take over. They should help you when you need that assistance.
Yeah, no, that's all really helpful. I think before we round up, have you got anything else you want to ask, Michelle?
No, I can think
we're just about there. I think that's really useful. I think the key takeaways really are, if you haven't got a power of attorney, you shouldn't be waiting until something happens, really. And you know, the younger you can do it, the better, really. I suppose that's probably the things I'm hearing that's coming through in this session. Would that be fair comment, Lorna?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also, just to mention, you can change the power of attorney. So as long as you still have capacity at the time you want to change it, you can't change it in the future. So definitely a good idea to think about it now and to get something in place just in case the worst should happen, and then you can just put it away and forget about it, you know. And I think that's one of the best things you can do for your family, to make it easy for them.
Definitely. No, that's been great. So thank you so much for joining us in this session, Lorna, and you too, Michelle. And hopefully we can share some more information. There'll be more of these on our Say Something Dundee Facebook page if you want to have a look there, because we are going to do a session on guardianship as well, and also wills and some care home fees myths as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.